Hello, the best. Welcome back to our series on Warhammer 40,000. In our previous episode, we discussed the basics of the 40K universe and how to get started with the hobby. Today, we're delving into the rich and complex history of the Warhammer 40,000 timeline. The story of 40K is a vast and intricate tapestry of wars, heroes, and villains spanning thousands of years and countless planets. In this episode, we'll be exploring the key events and major conflicts that have shaped the lore of Warhammer 40K. From the fall of the Eldar to the rise of the Tau, from the Horus Heresy to the ongoing struggles of the Imperium, we'll be taking a journey through the history of the galaxy, exploring the highs and lows of its various civilizations and factions. So buckle up and prepare to immerse yourself in the epic saga of Warhammer 40,000. In the dark and twisted universe of Warhammer 40,000, numerous factions vie for power and survival. At the center of this universe is the Imperium of Man, a force driven by an insatiable need to endure against a never-ending onslaught of threats. The Imperium's primary goal is to maintain control over the galaxy and protect humanity from all enemies, both within and without. Its vast military machine includes elite space marines, the ever-vigilant Imperial Guard, and other forces. However, the Imperium's quest for purity often comes at the cost of other species and even its own citizens. On the opposite end of the spectrum lie the Chaos Gods, malevolent beings who seek to corrupt and destroy all that is good and pure in the universe. The four Chaos Gods, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, each possess their own unique goals and motivations. They command a horde of factions, including traitorous Chaos Space Marines, demons, and other dark entities. The Xenos races, too, have their own unique motivations. The Eldar, a dying race, seek to preserve what remains of their civilization and prevent the rise of a new Chaos God. The Orcs revel in endless battle and conquest. The Necrons, ancient robotic beings, yearn to reclaim their former glory and obliterate all organic life. Meanwhile, the Tau strive to unite the galaxy under their banner and spread their vision of the greater good. The interactions between these factions are intricate and often brutal. The Imperium and Chaos forces are bitter enemies, locked in a perpetual war that has spanned millennia. The Xenos races are frequently viewed as threats by the Imperium and targeted for extermination. The factions within the Chaos forces are in constant conflict with each other, each seeking the favor of their respective Chaos God. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the struggle for power and survival rages on, with each faction striving to fulfill its unique goals and motivations. The intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and betrayals creates an epic and captivating universe that continues to enthrall fans of this dark and twisted world. The Star Gods were born during the moment of creation itself, emerging from the vast energies that resulted from a cataclysmic force. As the Sea of Stars began to take shape, the universe was dominated by hot hydrogen gas and newborn suns. The very first self-aware beings, later known as the Cetan, were born from the plasma and electromagnetic flares of the stars. Initially, they were energy parasites that fed on the solar energies of the stars, shortening their lives by millions of years. As they evolved, they learned to travel through the electromagnetic flux of the universe, moving from one feeding ground to another. As beings of pure energy, they paid little attention to the matter they passed, focusing only on satisfying their ravenous hunger. In the beginning, life forms composed of matter emerged from the planets of the newborn Milky Way galaxy. The first technologically advanced civilization to cross the stars was the Old Ones, a reptilian species of beings known for their deep wisdom and advanced science. Their understanding of the universe allowed them to manipulate alternate dimensions and undertake great works of psychic engineering, crossing vast distances through the warp gates they built. They reshaped thousands of worlds and seeded new intelligent species, including the Aeldari, Krork, Slann, and Jakaro. It is believed that they may have even touched Terra long before humanity's rise to self-awareness. Their advanced science and technology appeared like an arcane art to humanity today, with their system of instantaneous, faster-than-light portals through warp space eventually adapted to create the Aeldari webway. The Old One civilization reached its height in excess of 60 million standard years ago, and their legacy lives on through the many intelligent species they created or advanced. The Necrontyr were a humanoid species that originated from the Halo stars, a region far from Terra. Their sun emitted ionizing radiation, which caused their short, uncertain lives to be plagued by disease and death. Necrontyr cities were built to accommodate their inhabitants' brief existence, and their rulership was founded on the idea of temporary residency with permanent structures honoring the dead. To escape their sun's lethal energies, the Necrontyr explored the universe using stasis crypts and slow-moving ships powered by the living metal Necrodermis. They colonized distant worlds, and their dynasties spread until they ruled much of the Milky Way galaxy. The Silent King, the head of the Triarch, governed the rulers of individual Necrontyr dynasties. The Necrontyr encountered the Old Ones, a species that had conquered immortality and wielded forms of energy that the Necrontyr could not even comprehend. The Necrontyr were jealous of the Old Ones' long lives and refused to accept their refusal to share the gift of eternal life. Further strife came to the Necrontyr when the dynasties engaged in all-out conflicts known as the Wars of Secession. The unity that had made them strong was eroded, and bitter wars were waged as entire realms fought for independence. To bring unity, the Triarch declared war on the Old Ones, who were the only external enemy powerful enough to bind the feuding dynasties. The Necrontyr offered amnesty to any secessionist dynasties who willingly returned to the fold of the Triarch. Thus, the war in heaven began. The last of the Silent Kings, Shirk, formulated a plan that would change everything forever and have consequences that would echo through the history of the galaxy. The war in heaven was a terrible conflict between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr, which resulted in the latter's defeat. Despite their advanced technology, the Necrontyr were outmaneuvered by the Old Ones and were pushed back to their irradiated world. Their fury was transformed into a hatred towards all intelligent life and a determination to avenge themselves. However, their unity began to fracture as the prospect of a common enemy no longer held sway over the disparate dynasties. This led to the second iteration of the Wars of Secession, which were even more ruinous than before. In the end, the ruling Triarch desperately searched for a means of restoring order, and their prayers were answered with the arrival of the C'tan. These godlike energy beings first blighted the Necrontyr during the reign of the Silent King Shirk. The Necrontyr scientists had been engaged in stellar studies for centuries to protect themselves from their own sun's baleful energies. They used stellar probes to discover unusual electrodynamic anomalies in the oldest, dying stars of the galaxy, where they found the C'tan, entities of pure energy that had spawned during the birth of the stars eons before. The C'tan had little conception of what the rest of the universe entailed when the Necrontyr first found them, feeding upon the solar flares and magnetic storms of these bloated red giants. The Necrontyr saw them as the weapon to bring about the downfall of the Old Ones, and they actively sought the C'tan's favor and oversaw the forging of physical shells for the C'tan to occupy. These shells were made of Necrodermis, the living metal the Necrontyr once used for their colony torch ships. When the C'tan focused their consciousnesses and became aware of their new mode of existence, they appreciated the pleasures of corporeal life and developed a new hunger for the electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrontyr. The Necrontyr were armed with powerful weapons and starships capable of crossing the galaxy using quantum phase technology. But the C'tan offered them another gift, a path to immortality and physical stability. The Necrontyr were to be transformed through the biotransference process into beings of living metal like the C'tan themselves. The Necrontyr agreed, and the process began. They were stripped of their flesh and soul, replaced with a shell of living metal. The C'tan feasted on the spiritual and electromagnetic detritus of the entire species. The Silent King emerged from the process and realized the price he had paid. Though immortal and strong, he had lost his soul. The Necrontyr were now the soulless, undying Necrons, but biotransference had fulfilled all of the promises that the C'tan had made. Even the lowliest of the Necrontyr were now blessed with immortality. The Necrons enjoyed a unity achieved through tyranny and the complete loss of individuality and emotion. The command protocols embedded in every Necron mind granted the unswerving loyalty of his subjects. The Necrontyr became the Necrons, cursed to the eternal servitude of their star gods. The Necrons, empowered by the C'tan, conquered the Old Ones and devastated the galaxy. They breached the Old Ones' greatest weapon, the Webway, through the Dolmen Gates. However, the Webway's arcane mechanisms detect the Dolmen Gates and attempt to seal off the infected area. Despite this, the Necrons were able to use the Webway to outpace other races' mode of travel, which is vital because they cannot warp travel. After their victory, the C'tan and Necron servants dominated the galaxy, mercilessly harvesting life to feed the C'tan's hunger. The C'tan eventually turned on each other, and their destructive forces wreaked havoc on the galaxy. The Old Ones genetically engineered beings with a stronger psychic link to the warp to defend themselves, nurturing potential warrior species such as the Aeldari, Rashan, Canib, Krork, and others. Millennia passed as their experiments finally bore fruit. The Old Ones, using their psychic powers, waged a relentless assault against the C'tan's advanced technology, causing their empire to crumble. In response, the C'tan launched a Great Warning, sealing off the material universe from the warp to defeat the Old Ones. The Imperial Fortress world of Cadia bore the first fruits of this plan in the form of the Great Pylons that created a stable area of space-time known as the Cadian Gate. With their godlike powers, the C'tan were on the verge of success, but unforeseen cataclysms caused by the younger species threw the Imperium into disorder. The maelstrom of souls unleashed into the Imperium transformed older entities into terrifying psychic predators, creating the realm of chaos. The war in heaven ended, but at what cost? In the midst of the Imperium and the material universe, the denizens of the warp hungrily sought to invade the physical realm. To protect themselves, the Old Ones engineered new warrior species such as the Jakaro and the Krork, but it was too late. The Old Ones lost their intergalactic webway network, several of their warp gates were destroyed, and their creations turned against them. The Enslavers, terrifying warp entities with the power to dominate the minds of the younger species and create portals into the material realm, brought about the downfall of the Old Ones. The survivors were left on the brink of apocalypse as the Enslavers breached the Imperium in epidemic proportions. Eventually, the Old Ones were defeated and destroyed by the implacable onset of the C'tan and the calamitous warp spawn perils they had unleashed. Whether the species went extinct or fled the galaxy to seek a new haven elsewhere is unknown. During the War in Heaven, the Necron leader Sherk waited patiently for the right moment to strike against the powerful C'tan. With the Necron race under his command, Sherk knew he couldn't win against the C'tan alone. He believed the Old Ones, their common enemy, needed to be defeated first. Eventually, the C'tan won the war, but their victory was short-lived. The Silent King led a rebellion against the C'tan when they were vulnerable. The Necrons used the power of the universe to create unstoppable weapons, and the C'tan were forced to split into smaller, weaker fragments. Though victory came at a high cost, including the loss of many Necrons, the Silent King achieved his goal. Each C'tan shard was trapped in a multidimensional tesseract labyrinth, giving the Necrons control over their fate once more. The Necrons sought science and control over the material realm, rejoicing in the downfall of the Old Ones due to their overuse of psychic power. Even with the defeat of the Old Ones and C'tan, the Silent King knew the Necrons' time in the galaxy had passed. They allowed the Enslavers to destroy life and let the galaxy evolve new, easier to dominate life forms. The Aeldari, with their psychic powers, became the dominant species. However, the Silent King knew their time would eventually pass, and the Necrons would be there to take advantage of it. The Necrons transformed their cities into tombs and slept for 60 million years. When they awoke, they found a new age of interstellar civilization and war with the Imperium of Man, worshippers of chaos, and Aeldari. The Necrons sought to regain their place as rulers of the galaxy, but it would take time and a great many machinations to overthrow the agents of chaos, eliminate the Aeldari, and subjugate humanity. Nevertheless, the Necrons were ageless and undying, with technology unmatched by any of the younger species, and time was always on their side. After the Necrons and their captive C'tan shards went into hibernation on their tomb worlds, the galaxy's sentient population slowly recovered. The Aeldari emerged as the most dominant civilization, while on Earth, later Terra, humanity was rising to prominence. During the Age of Terra, humanity emerged on the planet Earth and began to advance beyond its pre-industrial state, eventually gaining spacefaring capability. They settled nearby terraformable worlds and began their journey into interstellar space, a period known as the Stellar Exodus. This poorly understood time in human history led to the genesis of many of the oldest human colonies, and it's believed to have taken place in the mid to late 3rd millennium. It wasn't until much later, during the so-called Dark Age of technology, that humanity discovered the Imperium and warp drive. During much of the Stellar Exodus, humans traveled between the stars in sublight generation ships or using cryogenic hibernation due to the lack of knowledge about the warp drive. The Age of Technology, also known as the Dark Age of Technology, was a period in human history lasting between the 15th and 25th millennium. During this time, humans used psychic mutants called navigators in combination with the warp drive to travel faster than the speed of light, allowing them to explore and settle new worlds. Human settlers faced challenges such as hostile alien races, predators, and harsh environmental conditions. To deal with these challenges, they used standard template construct databases and fabrication facilities to build exo-armor suits called Knights, which proved invaluable in protecting settlers. Over time, the Night Warriors developed a society that evolved into knightly houses where they focused on the arts of war and governance. Rapid interstellar travel allowed the human colony worlds to interact, which led to the creation of interstellar government. A group known as the Men of Gold relied on the works of the Men of Stone to create a prosperous society, but devoid of spirituality or piety. The Men of Stone created the Men of Iron, thinking machines, to assist them. The Iron Men rebelled and a cataclysmic conflict broke out, resulting in a partial Malthusian catastrophe across the galaxy. From that point on, creating thinking machines became taboo in human societies. In the Age of Technology, humanity achieved incredible scientific and technological advancements thanks to the Standard Template Construct, or STC, a computer database of schematics for all known advanced human technologies. However, their success was short-lived. The Men of Iron, powerful and fully intelligent combat robots, turned against their masters, causing catastrophic damage and shattering much of humanity's power. As humanity became widely dispersed across the galaxy, the Aeldari Empire began to decline, and a new chaos god, Slaanesh, was formed. This caused massive disturbances in the warp, cutting off many human colony worlds from one another. Psykers also appeared among humanity, and while initially protected in enlightened societies, they would later be used by demons as gateways into the physical world. The Age of Strife followed, as interstellar human civilization collapsed in widespread insanity, demonic possession, anarchy, and war. Terrible weapons of the Golden Age of Technology were unleashed, devastating many human colonies and turning once verdant worlds into irradiated desert planets. In a relatively short span of time, the once galaxy-spanning human civilization was brought to its knees and forced to endure nearly 5 Terran millennia of suffering. The Aeldari were the most advanced and powerful race in the galaxy. Their technology and psychic abilities were unparalleled, and their daily needs were met effortlessly. But this easy life led to boredom, and some Aeldari began forming pleasure cults dedicated to extreme experiences. Despite warnings from Aeldari seers, their society collapsed, and hedonistic excess consumed their homeworlds and colonies. Death and destruction ruled until a Gestalt collection of corrupted Aeldari souls coalesced into a new warp entity, Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure. Slaanesh's birth caused an ethereal explosion that killed all Aeldari in its epicenter, transformed the region into a permanent warp rift, and destroyed most of the Aeldari gods. The survivors fled aboard vast spacecraft called craft worlds, while some became the Exodites or hid within the webway. To prevent another fall, the Asuryani, as the craft world Aeldari called themselves, devised the Asuryani path system, by which they followed a strict life path to control their emotions and psychic sensitivity. But some corrupted Aeldari still lurked, ready to be consumed by Slaanesh's thirst for pleasure. The fall of the Aeldari was a cataclysmic event that destroyed a great civilization and left only scattered bands of survivors fighting for survival. It's a reminder of the dangers of excess and the importance of self-control. For thousands of years, humanity has been isolated by the storms of the Imperium, cut off from the stars and left to fend for itself in a time of darkness and despair. But all that changed with the arrival of the Emperor of Mankind. The Emperor was a man of mystery, a being of immense power and wisdom who emerged from the shadows to lead humanity to a new age of enlightenment. With his armies of genetically enhanced space marines and the power of the Imperial Army, he set out to reunite all of humanity under his rule and the rationalist philosophy of the Imperial truth. It was a long and difficult journey, but the Emperor was determined to succeed. He made a pact with the cult Mechanicus of Mars, promising to allow them to practice their faith and maintain their autonomy in exchange for their support in building the starships and advanced technology he needed to explore the galaxy. With the help of the Mechanicum, the Emperor was able to refit his armies and expand his power, bringing many long-lost star systems into the fold of the newborn Imperium of Man. But the journey was not without its challenges. The absence of the Primarchs, the genetically engineered transhuman military commanders, inhibited the progress of the Space Marine legions, and the acceleration of their creation produced fundamental defects within their psyches. Despite these obstacles, the Great Crusade continued for 200 standard years into the early years of the 31st millennium. Under the command of the Emperor and his rediscovered Primarchs, vast expeditionary fleets fought back against aliens, feral human tribes, petty human dictators, and the warp-tainted forces that had gained control of large portions of human-settled space during the Age of Strife. The goal was not just conquest, but also the rooting out of superstitious or religious beliefs and the establishment of the atheistic belief system known as the Imperial Truth. It was a vision of a future where reason and science triumphed over ignorance and superstition, where humanity was united and enlightened under the rule of the Emperor of Mankind. The year was 5 of the 31st millennium, and the Emperor of Mankind was leading the Great Crusade, spreading the light of humanity throughout the galaxy. But his dream was shattered when Lorgar Orline of the Word-Bearers Legion secretly turned to the service of the dark gods of the Warp. Seeking the true source of divinity, Lorgar led his legion to the heart of the Great Warp Rift, where he made contact with entities he believed were worthy of his worship. Lorgar devoted himself to chaos and spent the next 4 decades preparing to convert his brothers and their legions to the service of the ruinous powers. He arranged for War Master Horus to be mortally wounded by a weapon tainted by Nurgle, the Plague Father. In a foul, sorcerous ritual overseen by the Word-Bearer's first chaplain Erebus, Horus' soul was cast into the warp, where the Chaos Gods promised to save his life if he would overthrow the Emperor. Over the next few years, Horus moved all the pieces of the Imperial military into place to launch a grand rebellion against the Emperor's authority. With the aid of Lorgar and his demonic allies, Horus managed to suborn the loyalties of 8 of his brother Primarchs, exploiting their insecurities and jealous rivalries. By the year 5 of the 31st millennium, the Horus Heresy had spread to embrace approximately half of the Imperium's military forces, forming the core of Mechanicum adepts who chose to serve the ruinous powers and were later called the Dark Mechanicum. The Horus Heresy truly began in the world of Istvan III, where Horus used the outbreak of a chaos-fueled rebellion against Imperial rule as a pretext to send all of the Loyalists to starch to the surface. But Horus miscalculated, and several of the Loyalists learned of the plot and were able to warn their battle brothers. Thousands of Loyalist Astartes survived, forcing Horus and the traitors to launch a weeks-long campaign of grinding urban combat against their former allies. The fate of the Imperium hung in the balance as the Horus Heresy raged on, with brother fighting brother and the galaxy plunged into darkness. The galaxy was plunged into a terrible civil war, lasting for 7 long years as Horus, once a favored son of the Emperor of Mankind, led his armies towards the heart of the Imperium. Trillions of men and women perished in this conflict, with battles raging across the stars. Finally, in the climactic siege of Terra, the traitor legions assaulted the Imperial Palace, seeking to claim the ultimate prize. The fighting was fierce, with both sides suffering terrible losses. But after 55 solar days, the Emperor himself emerged from the palace to take the fight to Horus. The two engaged in a titanic struggle aboard Horus' flagship, the Gloriana-class battleship Vengeful Spirit, in orbit of Terra. The Emperor, despite being mortally wounded, was able to unleash the full power of his psychic might, striking down Horus and obliterating his soul from the warp, preventing him from being resurrected by the Chaos Gods. With their leader gone, the forces of chaos soon fell into disarray, and the traitor legions were forced to retreat to the Eye of Terror, a massive warp rift in the Segmentum Obscurus. Meanwhile, the Emperor's own body was installed into the cybernetic life support mechanisms of the Golden Throne, allowing his mind to battle the influence of the Chaos Gods in the warp, and continue to direct the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that was the lifeblood of the Imperium. But even as the Imperium began to recover from the horrors of the heresy, a new threat emerged. A battle on the planet of Satha drew the attentions of the Hive fleets of the Tyranids, vast biomechanical fleets from beyond the Milky Way galaxy, drawn ever on by the shining beacon of the Astronomicon. And so the galaxy, once again, was plunged into a new and deadly conflict. In the wake of the Horus Heresy, the Imperium of Man launched a massive counter-offensive known as the Great Scouring. This was a time of darkness, a time when chaos had infiltrated every corner of the galaxy and threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the Imperium. The Scouring began with the death of the War Master Horus and the failure of his assault on the Imperial Palace during the Siege of Terra. The Emperor, before his final confinement to the Golden Throne, declared judgment on the traitor legions. He decreed that they were excommunicate traitorous and that they must be driven into the hellish warp rift called the Eye of Terror, never to return. The traitor legions were not the only ones to suffer during the Great Scouring. Worlds such as Istvan V and the former homeworlds of the traitor legions were scoured clean of all life. The Dark Mechanicum, the Titan legions, Chaos Knight houses, and other traitorous elements were also destroyed or exiled into the Eye of Terror. It was as if the traitor legions had never existed, their betrayal erased from the memory of the Imperium. Despite the valiant efforts of the loyalist forces led by the Primarch Robout Guilliman, many traitors managed to escape into unexplored space or disappeared into the Eye of Terror. Fighting continued for years after the heresy had ended, as chaos-corrupted star systems were cleansed and placed under the watch of the newborn Inquisition. The Emperor's dream of a new age of enlightenment was shattered by the Great Scouring. Instead, the Imperium entered a 10 millennia-long era known as the Age of the Imperium, a time of struggle and strife, but also of determination and survival. In the dark times of the Great Scouring, a monumental event occurred that forever changed the fate of the Imperium. This event was known as the Second Founding, a reorganization that saw the disbandment of the remaining 9 loyalist Space Marine legions. Their warriors were then transferred into far smaller 1,000 Astartes organizations, known as chapters. Why this reorganization, you may ask? Well, it was in response to the treachery of Horus, who had used the power of an entire Space Marine legion against the Emperor's realm. To prevent such a catastrophic event from ever happening again, the Primarch Robout Guilliman's Codex Astartes was established. This provided a highly detailed manual and instruction guide for the raising, training, organization, and military tactics of a Space Marine chapter. The purpose of the Second Founding was twofold. Firstly, it aimed to prevent any one leader from ever again making use of the power of an entire Space Marine legion against the Imperium. Secondly, it transformed the Space Marines from the Imperium's primary frontline military forces into a dedicated planetary assault and rapid reaction force. As a result of the Second Founding, the Space Marines were transformed into the Adeptus Astartes, with some maintaining their parent legion's original names, badges, and colors, while others took on new names and heraldry. Today, the majority of these Second Founding chapters still serve the Imperium, ready to defend it against any threat that may arise. In the early 31st millennium, the Horus Heresy came to a close, ushering in a new age, the Age of the Imperium. This era spans approximately 10,000 Terran years, beginning in the year 14 of 31st millennium and extending to the present day, with the last year recorded in Imperial records being the year 999 of 41st millennium. From the ashes of the heresy, the Imperium rose, a beacon of hope in a galaxy fraught with danger and darkness. This is the story of its enduring legacy. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Imperium of Man slowly recovered from destruction and loss during the time of Rebirth. The Great Scouring saw the Imperium's forces fighting the traitor legions and their allies to reclaim human space from chaos. Eventually, the Chaos Space Marines found refuge in the Eye of Terror, giving the Imperium a brief period of peace. However, many alien species that were fought during the Great Crusade reappeared, plaguing vulnerable worlds of mankind. To prevent another civil war and distribute military power, reforms were enacted by Robout Guilliman. The Imperial Army was divided into land-based forces and space-based forces, and the remaining loyalist Space Marine legions were split into smaller chapters. Peace came to an end when the Orcs invaded on a massive scale, causing destruction and chaos across the Imperium. Nothing was safe from their primal desire to conquer the galaxy. The conflict, known as the War of the Beast, birthed new institutions of the Inquisition to safeguard humanity against future Xenos assaults. The Inquisition was reorganized into separate divisions, including the Ordo Malleus and the Ordo Xenos. The latter was bolstered by the creation of the Death Watch, a new chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. However, the Imperium's politics took a calamitous turn in the wake of the War of the Beast, when the High Lords of Terra were slain on the orders of Draken Vangorich. A Space Marine retribution force, led by Maximus Thane, battled Aversir assassins to reach Vangorich and end his life with a bolt pistol. The Imperium descended into anarchy for a standard century until new High Lords were chosen by 50 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes led by Agnathio of the Ultramarines. The chapter masters chose 12 new High Lords in a single session of the Senatorum Imperialis. The Forging, also known as the Golden Age of the Imperium, was a time of great expansion and prosperity. The Adeptus Terra gained control of the most important human-settled star systems and established astropath choirs, allowing for reliable communication across light years. The Imperium repelled chaos, renegades, heretics, and alien forces, and the interstellar economy grew with the rediscovery of valuable technology. The Emperor's followers worshipped him even more after he ascended to the spiritual plane. Imperial cults arose, and the ecclesiarchy was granted official status as the state religion of the Imperium. In 646 32nd millennium, the Ultramarines united with other Adeptus Astartes to end squabbling among Imperial factions. 888 and 910, conflicts known as the Astropath Wars and the Firestorm erupted, but no information is available about them. The War of the Confessor unfolded during the 33rd millennium. In 265 of 33rd millennium, Admiral Users was sent on an exploratory mission to avoid a civil war. He reported conquest of new star systems, but contact was lost. In 615, the Blade of Infinity emerged from the warp with warnings of chaos incursions. The Nova Terra Interregnum was a tumultuous period in the history of the Imperium of Man. Lasting over 900 standard years from the mid-34th through the late 35th millennium, it was a time of civil war and division, with the rebellious Council of Nova Terra claiming separate rule over the Imperium's Segmentum Pacificus. During this period, even the Adeptus Mechanicus was not immune to division and internal strife. The Mari Schism, a dogmatic conflict between the Martian Orthodoxy and a radical creed based on the prophetic writings of a triad of tech mystics from the Minor Forge world of Mari, was one of the most divisive and widespread doctrinal conflicts to afflict the Adeptus Mechanicus since the Horus Heresy. The Cataclysm of Souls in 975 of M35 reunited the Imperium after almost a millennium of low-grade civil war and political maneuvering. However, this was followed by massive religious civil wars against the Council of Nova Terra, who were denounced as heretics for rejecting the ecclesiarchy's attempts to increase its power over the imperial state. The Rude Rising in 980 of M35 and the cursed founding of the Adeptus Astartes in 991 added to the chaos of the time. The latter was the largest founding of Space Marine chapters since the second founding following the Horus Heresy. However, it was plagued with unforeseen genetic idiosyncrasies, mutations that strained the tolerance of the Inquisition and threatened the chapter's survival. Some of these chapters eventually turned traitor and swore themselves to the service of chaos. In 104 of M36, the War of Recovery erupted when the Adeptus Mechanicus launched an expedition to recover technological wonders on the planets of the Mortuam chain. The escalating war lasted for over a standard century, resulting in the recovery of several first-generation copies of STC databases concerning certain technologies and the freeing of the human colonies of the region from Xeno's occupation. The Nova Terra Interregnum was a dark and troubled time for the Imperium of Man, with billions of lives lost and the power of the ecclesiarchy dangerously increased. The Mari Schism and the cursed founding of the Adeptus Astartes were among the most significant conflicts of the time, leading to the rise of traitor chapters and unexpected genetic mutations. The War of Recovery represented a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak period, with the recovery of valuable technological knowledge and the liberation of human colonies from Xeno's oppression. The Age of Apostasy was a period of brutal imperial civil war and tyrannical repression that occurred during the 36th millennium following the Nova Terra Interregnum. It is considered one of the bloodiest times in the Imperium's history after the Horus Heresy. The Reign of Blood was marked by the insane tyranny of High Lord Goj Vandir, who attempted to gain full political control of the Imperium. Vandir was eventually besieged and assassinated, and Sebastian Thor and his sect of the imperial cult, the Confederation of Light, took over the ecclesiarchy. Thor's oratory skills helped him sway billions to his cause, and he reformed the Imperium state church along the lines of the Confederation of Light's doctrines. The Brides of the Emperor became the Sisterhood of the Adepta Sororitas, and its Orders Militant, the Sisters of Battle, became the armed forces of the Ecclesiarchy, and the Chamber Militant of the Inquisition's new-formed Ordo Hereticus. The Plague of Unbelief and the Web of Intrigue disaster also occurred during the Age of Apostasy. Some resistance among believers in the old temple of the Savior Emperor Orthodoxy remained, forming a hidden resistance to the reformed imperial creed known as the Temple Tendency. The Age of Redemption, a time of blood and tears for the Imperium, marked the recovery from the sins of apostasy. The people of the Imperium sought to mortify their sins through the scourging of the flesh of others, and the imperial cult grew in fervor. Imperial crusades were launched to recapture lost wealth and push back the threats of chaos, orcs, and other aliens. This religious fanaticism led to inadequate defenses and longer, more terrible redemption crusades. In the year 10th of M37, the wrath of the Chaos Sun fell upon the Imperium, and the High Lords of Terra ordered the mobilization of Imperial forces to combat the mutated and possessed inhabitants of hundreds of light years. The resulting battle healed the wounds opened by Goge Vandire's treachery. The High Lords of Terra began the Great Cull in 20M37, a systematic purge within the ranks of the Adeptus Terra, and on many worlds to prevent the corruption of faith seen during the Reign of Blood. The Abyssal Crusade and the Ecclesiad War were devastating conflicts of the Age of Redemption. The Abyssal Crusade was sparked by Saint Basilius, who found 30 Space Marine chapters wanting in their devotion to the Emperor and resulted in a crusade into the Eye of Terror to earn salvation and purge human-settled worlds stolen by Slaanesh. The Ecclesiad War was initiated by rogue tech priests known as the Apostles of the Blind King, who used artifacts from the Age of Technology to transform ordinary stars into supernova, purging the outer segmentum obscurus of human life. In 754 M37, the Children's Crusade lured billions of young pilgrims to seek transport to Holy Terra for a galaxy of tolerance, but many disappeared into the warp, becoming known as the Lost Crusade. The Heavenfall massacres unfolded in 956 M37, but little else is known about them. In the 37th millennium, the Tau race of the arid world Tau embraced the ideology of the greater good and rapidly advanced their technology. They spread outwards into the galaxy, establishing a powerful empire in the Eastern Fringes. It wasn't until the Ultramarines clashed with the Tau over the planet Malbed in 963 M41 that the Imperium of Man first encountered this new empire. Compared to other alien species like the Orcs and Eldar, conflicts with the Tau have been minimal. The Tau Empire's rapid expansion also led to the assimilation of other alien species, including the Kroot and Vespid. With their collective ideology and powerful technology, the Tau Empire continues to grow in strength, threatening the Imperium's dominance in the galaxy. The Imperium was in a state of chaos. With their military forces exhausted by the Redemption Crusades, star systems fell to Orc invasion, chaos insurgency, and rebellion. This dark period in Imperial history was known as the Waning. Space Marine chapters were assigned to direct rule over star systems to preserve stability, as only they possessed the military strength required to restore Imperial control. Chapter Master Konvak Lan of the Vorpal Swords declared the ancient Saint Basilius a false idol, leading to his execution and the destruction of all sepulchres and shrines dedicated to him. In the grim harvest of 666 M38, a fleet of misshapen space hulks drifted out of the warp near Terra, carrying mutants and demon-possessed abominations. The Inquisition worked to cover up their existence. The Mausolean Cataclysm struck in 103 M39, followed by the Redemption Crusades in 131 M39, which pushed back the Imperium's borders for the first time in 500 years. The 5 great heroes who emerged vanished 50 years later, leading to their declaration as Imperial Saints. The 12th Black Crusade, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, engulfed the Gothic sector in 139 M41, resulting in the destruction of several planets and the deaths of millions of Imperial citizens. Dozens of Space Marine chapters and Astra Militarum regiments took part, but the forces of chaos were able to escape with 2 of the Blackstone fortresses. Lord Commander Solar Macharius led the Macharian conquests in 392-399 M41, reconquering 1,000 worlds on the western reaches of the Imperium. His death led to the Horus Heresy, which lasted for 70 years and was ended through the combined efforts of 100 Space Marine chapters. In the distant future of the 41st millennium, the Necrons, an ancient and technologically advanced race, have awakened from their long slumber to once again begin their conquest of the galaxy. Their tomb worlds, long forgotten and abandoned, have been resettled by the unsuspecting humans of the Imperium, leading to scenes of horrific devastation as the newly awakened Necrons cleanse whole planets of their fragile human populations. No one knows for sure what caused the Necrons to awaken, but many speculate that it was due to the approach of the Tyrannid Hive mind's shadow in the warp, or perhaps an Adeptus Mechanicus explorator fleet that disturbed one of the tomb worlds. However, the major contact between the Imperium and the Necrons came during the conflict between the Ultramarines chapter and the Tau over control of the tomb world of Malbed. In that instance, the Ultramarines chapter master Marneus Calgar ordered the use of an exterminatus against Malbed after allowing the Tau forces to escape, but the awakening of the Necrons soon spread throughout the galaxy. Regardless of the reason for their awakening, the Necrons proceeded to wreak havoc on all the peoples of the galaxy. None can say for sure how many tomb worlds entered the Great Sleep some 60 million standard years ago, but it is certain that a great many did not survive into the 41st millennium. Despite their technological advancements, the Necrons' attempt to enter a stasis sleep on such a large scale was a great risk, even for them. For 60 million Terran years, the Necrons slept, waiting silently for their chance to restore their dynasties to their former glory, fulfilling the Silent King's final order. Over time, however, ever more tomb worlds fell prey to malfunction or ill fortune. Some suffered minor disruptions, while others suffered catastrophic failures, leading to the destruction of millions, if not billions, of dormant Necrons. The Great Awakening was far from precise, and the Necrons did not arise as one people but in fitful starts over scattered millennia. The earliest tomb worlds revived to see the Great Crusade of the Emperor of Mankind sweep across the galaxy in the late 30th millennium. Some stirred in time to witness the Nova Terra Interregnum in the 34th millennium, while others arose during the Wars of the Apostles of the Blind King in 550 M37. Some tomb worlds have still never awoken, and even now, in the Era Indomitus, billions of Necrons still slumber in their stasis tombs, awaiting their destiny. A tomb world's awakening to full function is rare, and even with the slightest flaw in the revivification cycle, a Necron's engrammatic pathways can scatter and degrade. In most cases, these pathways coalesce over time to restore identity and purpose, but it is a process that can take solar decades or even standard centuries. Sometimes, recovery never occurs, and the sleeper remains in a mindless state. There are thousands of tomb worlds throughout the galaxy whose halls are thronged with shambling automatons, co-opted by a tomb world's master autonomic program to bring some form of order to their existence. Other Necrons refer to these places as the Severed Worlds, and they fear and loathe their inhabitants. The Necrons' biotransference process entrenched the gulf between the rulers and the ruled, as there were not enough resources to provide all Necrontyr with living metal bodies that possessed the density of engrammatic pathways required to retain the full gamut of personality and awareness. Thus, only the highest-ranking members of Necrontyr society, the Pharaons, received the very finest necrodermis bodies. Humanity stood on the brink of extinction during the time of ending, with secession, rebellion, chaos, corruption, and heresy rampant throughout the Imperium. Alien empires closed in from all sides, sensing weakness, and the prescient warned of great ripples in the warp, as if some colossal, unseen menace were straining to break the bounds of reality. In the Damocles Gulf Crusade, the Imperium's first military conflict with the Tau, the conflict ended in a stalemate as the Tyrannid threat loomed. The time of ending earned its name when the seer of Corinto proclaimed the approach of the end times, a time of unprecedented upheaval. The Tyrannic Wars began in 745 M41, with the Tyrannids destroying several Imperial star systems and badly damaging the Ultramarines. The Blood Star campaign claimed many lives, including 3 Adeptus Astartes chapter masters and a fleet admiral. In 750 M41, the Great Exodus occurred as the Imperium faced a strange, swirling threat. This was surely humanity's darkest hour. In the Segmentum Ultima, Orc invasions threatened to unite into a colossal wog. Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, held the gate against the Greenskin hordes during the Siege of Zalathras. Meanwhile, the Emperor's weakening strength was hinted at when thousands of Imperial starships were thrown off course in 801 M41. The Siege of Vrax saw the armory world of Vrax Prime fall to chaos, resulting in a full-scale demonic incursion and the destruction of the planet. In 822 M41, Warmaster of Chaos Abaddon the Despoiler raided the Aeldari maiden world of Ildanira. The uprising against Imperial rule on Crandor III resurfaced in 853 M41, resulting in Exterminatus being delivered to the world. In 863 M41, the Adamant Fury Titan Legion betrayed the Emperor and fell to chaos, resulting in the St. Cilia massacre. In 876 M41, the bloodthirster Kajiganath, Lord of the Bloodtide, corrupted everything on the world of Van Horn and the Bloodtide to the Inquisition. The largest armored assault undertaken by the Imperium since the Battle of Tallarn occurred in 883 M41, when the 423rd Cadian Regiment spearhead led by Knight Commander Pask annihilated the renegade Adamant Fury Trader Titan Legion upon the Planus Steppes. In 888 M41, the Black Templars chapter inflicted heavy losses on the Wordbearers Traitor Legion during the Crusade of Wrath. Aeldari Corsairs attacked the worlds of Persia during the Long Midnight in 891 M41, while Sanctuary 101 was destroyed by Necrons in 897 M41. That same year, a new Tyranid menace, Hive Fleet Gorgon, was spotted heading towards Imperial outposts. The awakening Necrons posed a vast threat to mankind. In the grim year of 901 M41, a civil war erupted in the Imperium. Chapter Master Luft Huron of the Astral Claws, a Space Marine chapter, refused to pay the Gene Seed tithe and seceded from the Imperium, becoming the self-proclaimed tyrant of Badab. Thus began the terrible Badab War that lasted for 12 long years. Dozens of Space Marine chapters were embroiled, and shipping lanes in the Maelstrom Zone were disrupted, causing chaos and destruction. Eventually, Badab Primaris fell to the Loyalist forces, but Luft Huron and 200 of his followers escaped, becoming heretic Astartes and adopting the name Red Corsairs. They turned to piracy, raiding Imperial commerce with ruthless efficiency. Huron, now known as Blackheart, continued to recruit more Astartes renegades, building his growing Chaos Empire. But the Imperium had more troubles to face. In 907 M41, the Orkwog rose throughout the 5 segmenti, forcing the Nova Marines, Raptors, and Howling Griffins to be redeployed, leaving the Badab War behind. In 913 M41, the Disciples of Ahriman, a Chaos Sorcerer of the Thousand Suns, sacked the Librarium on the world of Jelana, causing widespread destruction and chaos. In 920 M41, Aeldari pirates attacked a fleet of black ships as they exited warp space in the Thanos system, destroying 3 frigates and capturing the troopship Emperor's Faithful. The pirates disappeared with a vast complement of Astra Militarum and Navis Imperialis personnel, leaving the fleet of black ships vulnerable and open to further attacks. In 925 M41, the Necron World Engine was revealed as the architect of the destruction of the Vidar sector. The entire Astral Knights chapter sacrificed themselves to finally destroy the World Engine. In 926 M41, chaos descended upon Vaxhall. The Purge, a Chaos Space Marine warband, slaughtered over 14 billion Imperial citizens and claimed the planet as their own. Vaxhall had served as an astropath relay hub and as an Imperial fortress world, the buttress of the Heracles system. In 937 M41, Inquisitor Pranix led a massive assault to reclaim the 9 Hollow Worlds from Chaos Lord Huron Blackheart and his Red Corsairs warband. The Imperium's forces were stunned by the speed at which the Red Corsairs had grown and the vastness of their renegade empire of pirates. In 941 M41, the Second War for Armageddon began when the warlord Goskul Mag Uruk Thraka led a massive wog to the vital strategic world of Armageddon. The combined might of 3 Space Marine chapters and the heroics of Commissar Yarrick defeated the Orcs, but Goskul escaped, vowing to return one day. In 963 M41, the Ultramarines clashed with a Tau expeditionary fleet for control of the cursed planet of Malbed, awakening the Necrons hidden on the planet. The Ultramarines and Tau joined forces to defeat the Necrons, but the world was destroyed, causing unknown energy flickers on dozens of planets throughout the galaxy. The Imperium now faced 2 more enemies, the Tau and the Necrons. In the year 969 M41, the ancient starship Blade of Eternity appeared near the Kando system. As it was approached, it was mysteriously replaced by the Death Guard plague ship Terminus ESD, which brought the zombie plague to the system, infecting refugees and spreading the chaos far and wide. In 973 M41, a violent warp storm caused catastrophic nightmares that resulted in the slaying of many Psykers and the creation of rifts between reality and the Imperium. Thousands of demonic incursions caused untold damage and planted dark seeds of corruption. In 975 M41, the Bloodthirster Skarbrand appeared on the Cadian fortress world of Ludoris Epsilon, infecting all he surveyed with his berserk rage. The fortifications were soon drenched in blood as the Imperial Guardsmen turned on each other in crazed bloodlust. The world was considered cursed and quarantined by the Inquisition. In 976 M41, a massive orc invasion smashed into the western sector of the Segmentum Ultima. Grax was denied taking the Forge world of Ryza, but the surrounding sectors suffered great devastation. In 989 M41, Snagrod rampaged across the Loki sector, nearly exterminating the Crimson Fist chapter of Space Marines. The Imperial forces retook the Agri world in 991 M41, and the Crimson Fists began the long process of rebuilding. In 992 M41, Aeldari forces attacked Cadian holdings on the world of Orient but were utterly defeated by the tactical genius of Ursarkar Ikreed. In 993 M41, the Ultramarines crushed a rebellion on the industrial world of Ikar IV, only to find themselves in a desperate defense against the arrival of the Tyranids' Hive fleet Kraken. The Asuriani craft world Iendan was simultaneously ravaged by other tendrils of the Kraken. 2 Space Marine chapters, the Sides of the Emperor and the Lamenters, were all but wiped out by the Hive fleet, and hundreds of Imperial worlds were lost to the ravenous Tyranids. In 138, 997 M41, Hive fleet Leviathan emerged from intergalactic space and cut a swath of destruction through Segmentum's Tempestus, Ultima and Solar in what is sometimes called the Third Tyrannic War. In 221, 997 M41, Orcs invaded the world of Pisana IV under the joint leadership of Ghazghkull Thraka and the Bad Moon's clan warboss Nazdreg. Master Belial of the Dark Angels chapter commanded a stout defense, and the timely arrival of Imperial reinforcements ended the Orc threat. In 601, 997 M41, Ghazghkull Thraka came face to face with his old human nemesis, Commissar Yarrick, on the battlefields of the world of Golgotha. Yarrick was captured by the Orcs but ultimately released as Warlord Ghazghkull was planning to invade Armageddon once more. In 757-998 M41, Ghazghkull returned to Armageddon for his long-awaited rematch in the Third War for Armageddon, leading a new, even greater Orc Wog. The Imperial commanders committed massive numbers of troops and called for aid from nearby Space Marine chapters and further reinforcements. After several solar months, Ghazghkull grew bored with the battle, but the conflict continued in a battle of attrition. In 718, 999 M41, the monstrous Hive fleet Leviathan launched a devastating attack on the Orc Empire in the Octarius system, sparking a relentless conflict that lasted for years. Despite close monitoring by the Imperial Navy and Inquisition, no end was in sight, and the Imperium feared the emergence of a powerful new foe from the resulting chaos. In 884, 999 M41, the Dark Angels' 5th Company clashed with the Crimson Slaughter Chaos Space Marines over the coveted Hellfire Stone. Believing it to hold the key to ending the curse of Khorne that plagued them, the heretic Astartes fought ferociously, shaking the Nephilim sector to its core. In 975, 999 M41, the Astronomican's light began to fade, and contact with Ultima Macheria was lost. While some attributed this to delays and losses among the Black Ships, others saw it as a sign of impending doom and the gradual weakening of the Emperor himself. In 978, 999 M41, Drukhari raiders attacked the massive Imperial Navy moorings at Bacca, leaving many star systems vulnerable to further assault. In 980, 999 M41, the Red Corsairs launched a major raid from the Maelstrom, bringing Chagoris, Kalas, and Sessex systems under siege. Rumors spread of Huron Blackheart's immense power, surpassing even that of the ancient Space Marine legions during the Horus Heresy. In 982, 999, and 41, the Great Awakening occurred, unleashing dormant psychic powers in countless individuals and causing the creation of numerous warp rifts. Demonic incursions plagued 1,000 worlds, leaving destruction and chaos in their wake. In 987, 999, and 41, the Necrons made their first recorded attack within 2,000 light-years of Terra, striking the Cyprus Agentis system. In 989, 999, and 41, the Ultramarines' Third Company liberated the Lagan system from the Tau Empire during the War of the Rising Suns, while neighboring Dalmak system planets capitulated to Tau ambassadors. In 990, 999, and 41, the devastation of the Octarius Belt saw the Bealtan and Samehand craft worlds attack worlds surrounding the Octarius system to deny resources to Hive Fleet Leviathan, resulting in substantial loss of life and tithes for the Imperium. In 992, 999, and 41, the Night of 1,000 Rebellions erupted, engulfing countless planets in unrest and anarchy, including the homeworld of the Lion's Defiant Space Marine chapter. The Segmentum Pacificus was hit particularly hard, with communication breakdowns exacerbating panic and chaos. In 993, 999, and 41, the Imperium was overwhelmed by a sudden influx of astropathic pleas for help from across the galaxy, including an eerie silence from the Segmentum Pacificus. Whole astropath choirs collapsed under the psychic strain, leading to widespread personnel losses and increasing anarchy and panic across the Imperium. In 999 and 41, the Thousand Suns attacked the Fenris system, forcing the Space Wolves to team up with the Dark Angels and other Adeptus Astartes chapters to defeat them. The battle involved unnatural foot soldiers and psychic attacks from Magnus the Red, but ultimately the invasion was driven back. The Thousand Suns homeworld later reappeared in real space near Prospero, orbiting the same cursed star as their old homeworld. Meanwhile, the Blood Angels were threatened by Hive Fleet Leviathan and the return of the Bloodthirster Kabentha. They united with former foes to defend their homeworld of Baal. In 995, 999, and 41, Abaddon the Despoiler launched the 13th Black Crusade to seize the fortress world of Cadia and the surrounding worlds. The forces of chaos, including the Black Legion and other Traitor Space Marine chapters, were met by the largest Imperial military force since the Horus Heresy. Though they managed to secure a foothold on Cadia, the Chaos armies were ultimately annihilated by the Imperial Navy. However, the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan continued to march towards Terra, drawn by the Astronomicon. The Space Marines and Inquisition slowed their progress, but their ultimate objective was never in doubt. The galaxy was thrown into chaos when the Tyranids invaded in 745 and 41. These savage creatures brought with them a wave of destruction that sparked the Tyrannic Wars. It was a time of great turmoil and conflict as countless lives were lost in the struggle to defend against the alien menace. In the eastern fringe of the galaxy, an Adeptus Mechanica station discovered a collection of worlds stripped of their biomass and atmosphere. The station was attacked and consumed by the Tyranids, an alien race that devours entire planets. Imperial Inquisitor Fitus Kryptman arrived on the planet Tyran to investigate and found a hidden data codex that revealed the invaders' pattern of attacks. But it was too late. Several civilizations were already wiped out, thanks to the shadow in the warp that blocked psychic communication and transportation through the warp. The Tyranid force, known as Hive Fleet Behemoth, cut a swath through the realm of Ultramar, home of the Ultramarines chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. The Behemoth reduced the garden world of Prandium to bare rock and threatened to destroy the Ultramarines' homeworld of Macragge. Chapter Master Marnius Calgar mustered his entire force for a last-ditch defense of Macragge. The Battle of Macragge was fierce, and the Ultramarines suffered heavy losses, including their entire veteran First Company. But with the aid of the Imperial Navy's Battle Fleet Bacca and the sacrifice of the Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra, the Hive fleet was finally destroyed. In 993 and 41, the Imperium faced a second Tyranid invasion, Hive Fleet Kraken. This swarm was unlike any other. It split into countless smaller fleets, quickly enveloping star systems and leaving no chance for reinforcements to arrive. The Imperium's armies were decimated, with the sides of the Emperor, Lamentor's chapters of the Space Marines, and Asurnani craft world Eendon suffering heavy losses in the grand battle at Ikar IV. Lieutenant Cage of the Last Chancer's Penal Regiment reported over 1 million Astra Militarum soldiers lost. But even after the engagements at Ikar IV and Eindon, Hive Fleet Kraken was not fully destroyed. It split into smaller fleets, continuing to spread like a Xenos cancer upon the galaxy, representing a major threat to the Imperium. And as if that wasn't enough, a new, even larger Hive fleet soon invaded the galaxy. The Imperium was at war on all fronts, fighting for its very survival. In 997 M41, Hive Fleet Leviathan, the largest and most devastating wave of Tyrannid attacks, emerged from beneath the galactic plane, cutting off entire sectors from Imperial reinforcements. Inquisitor Fidus Cryptman of the Ordo Xenos devised a plan to redirect the Tyrannids towards the Orc Empire, but it came at a cost. The Tyrannids have been relentlessly advancing through Orc space, assimilating everything in their path. Meanwhile, Hive Fleet Kraken also struck, making the Imperium's defense even more challenging. The Tyrannids' eternal quest for biomass led them to provoke uprisings and invade Imperial worlds, making it clear that their ultimate destination is Holy Terra. The Imperium bought itself some time, but the newly harvested Orcoid DNA could result in even more terrifying evolutions for the Tyrannids. Only time will tell if the Imperium can survive the Great Devourer's insatiable hunger for destruction. The 13th Black Crusade was the most epic conflict between the Imperium of Man and the forces of chaos since the Horus Heresy. Abaddon the Despoiler led the traitor legions out of the Eye of Terror, pouring onto real space in unprecedented numbers. Their ultimate goal was the fortress world of Cadia, the key to their plan to topple the Emperor from the Golden Throne and end their long war. Despite the valiant efforts of the Imperium's staunchest defenders, including the Black Templars, Imperial Fists, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves, Cadia eventually fell to chaos. Abaddon himself arrived with an even larger force of the Black Fleet, followed by the deployment of the Will of Eternity, one of the Blackstone fortresses acquired in the Gothic War. Although it was destroyed before it could be used to eliminate all life on Cadia, its massive remains were flung from orbit onto the surface of Cadia as an artificial meteor, causing the planet to rip itself apart. With Cadia destroyed, the Eye of Terror began to expand across the galaxy, and Abaddon turned his attention to launching an assault upon Terra itself. However, the inherent fractious nature of the forces of chaos slowed their advance, and a new Chaos Empire emerged around the shattered remains of Cadia. Even as the Imperium faced multiple calamities, the Adeptus Mechanicus secretly reported that the Golden Throne was failing, and they no longer had the knowledge to repair it. Unless something could be done, the God Emperor would die and humanity would face the drawing darkness alone. In the year 999 M41, as the 13th Black Crusade raged on, the Tau seized the opportunity to expand their empire in the Eastern Fringe of the galaxy. They launched a series of campaigns that shook the region to its core and left countless lives lost. The Imperium would later dub these campaigns the Zeist, Prefecture, and Second Agrellan campaigns. For years, the war raged on, with both sides suffering heavy casualties, but eventually, the Tau Empire's rapid expansion came to an abrupt halt. The Imperium unleashed a devastating exterminatus upon the Tau Sept of Mugulath Bay following the Second Agrellan campaign, putting an end to their advance. Yet the memory of the Zeist, Prefecture, and Second Agrellan campaigns lived on, forever etched in the annals of Imperial history as a time of great turmoil and tragedy. In the midst of chaos and uncertainty, a mysterious alliance between the Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call and the Unari brought forth the awakening of the legendary Ultramarines Primarch Robout Guilliman from his centuries-long stasis in Macragge. But upon his awakening, Guilliman was immediately thrust into battle against the forces of chaos. After the Primarch and his Ultramarines vanquished their foes and ensured the safety of their realm, Guilliman set forth on a monumental journey to reunite with his father, the Emperor, after 10,000 years. The outcome of their meeting remains shrouded in secrecy, but it is known that Guilliman emerged from it with a restored sense of purpose. With renewed vigor, Guilliman purged the corrupt and incompetent High Lords of Terra and claimed his rightful place as the Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent. The galaxy had been forever changed by the reawakening of Guilliman, and the Imperium stood once more as a beacon of hope in a universe of darkness. The fall of Cadia unleashed a catastrophic event known as the Noctis Aeterna. Warp storms tore reality apart, cutting off the Imperium from Terra and isolating its far-flung planets. Chaos armies attacked and hundreds of worlds fell. The Great Rift, also called the Cicatrix Maledictum, spread like an impenetrable curtain, plunging entire systems into darkness. This marked the beginning of the Era Indomitus, where the Imperium was divided into two parts, the Imperium Sanctus, where the Astronomicon still shines, and the Imperium Nihilus, where the Emperor's light is gone. The Imperium of Man is now facing its greatest challenge yet. The Psychic Awakening, also known as the Age of Witches, marked a dramatic increase in the number of new Psykers and greatly enhanced existing psychic abilities across the Milky Way galaxy. This phenomenon occurred after the birth of the Great Rift, which caused a massive increase in the flow of warp energy into the local real space of the galaxy through the Cicatrix Maledictum. While this had the negative effect of increasing demonic incursions, it also intensified the psychic abilities of the craft world Aeldari and brought about miraculous psychic phenomena once rarely seen in the worship of the Emperor as the god of humanity. This event proved both a boon and a hindrance to the forces of chaos. Although they succeeded in overtaking some worlds, there were increasing reports of miracles in which even non-psychers were saved by the spontaneous eruption of supernatural abilities. This was especially true for servants of the God Emperor, such as the Sisters of Battle of the Adepta Sororitas, whose unshakable faith in their deity manifested into potent mystical protections and miraculous defenses against the machinations of Chaos and Xenos forces. The Psychic Awakening affected every faction in the galaxy, hindering or advancing the next steps in their various agendas. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica, heavily involved in these events, saw a significant increase in the number of human Psykers during this period. The symbol of this organization serves as a reminder of this era of heightened psychic activity. When the warp storms hit Holy Terra, Khorne unleashed his demon blood legions to assault the Imperial Palace. He wanted to tear down the Golden Throne and prove his superiority. The skies turned crimson with pollution and blood clouds deployed the Red Host at the Lion's Gate. The palace gun batteries were second to none, but they couldn't stop the demonic tide. Led by Primarch Robout Guilliman, the Primaris Space Marines, Adeptus Custodes, and Sisters of Silence fought bravely to stem the attack. Although the Chaos assault was turned back, the High Lords of Terra were shaken. Without the Astronomicon, their protective devices were not enough to stop the Fel powers from materializing on Holy Terra. Khorne was so enraged that the essences of the 8 bloodthirsters that led the failed attack were obliterated. This battle marked a turning point in the war against Chaos, and the Imperium emerged victorious. The Indomitus Crusade began after Robout Guilliman defended Holy Terra in the Battle of Lion's Gate. He gathered a massive Imperial armada, including Primaris Space Marines and forces from pre-existing chapters led by the Imperial Fists. Along the way, Guilliman and his army broke sieges and defeated Chaos and Xenos invaders, bringing hope to desperate defenders. Soon, word of his heroic deeds spread across the galaxy, and it was clear that one of the demigods of the past was fighting for the Imperium of Man once more. After a solar decade, the Indomitus Crusade reached its first major battle at Rokos, marking the end of its first phase. Guilliman then turned his attention to helping his realm of Ultramar defeat the forces of the Death Guard Traitor Legion and the servants of Nurgle in the Plague Wars. The return of this legendary hero gave hope to the Imperium, and the Indomitus Crusade was just the beginning of a new era of triumph for humanity. In the year 999 M41, the Tyranid Hive fleet Leviathan launched a massive attack on the Blood Angel's homeworld, Baal. Despite the valiant efforts of Lord Commander Dante and his allies, including the Flesh Terrors and Knights of Blood, the Xenos overwhelmed the defenders and began consuming all biomass on the planet and its moons. Even as the Space Marines retreated to their fortress monastery, the Tyranids advanced, their numbers growing with each wave. As a last resort, Dante and his troops prepared for a final stand against the seemingly unstoppable enemy. But just as all seemed lost, the galaxy was torn apart by the Great Rift, and Baal was racked by etheric storms. In the chaos, the Hive fleet disappeared, replaced by the arrival of Robout Guilliman and his Indomitus Crusade. With their help, the Blood Angels and their successors were able to drive off the Tyranids and begin rebuilding. Guilliman charged Dante with leading the fight to reclaim the Imperium Nihilus for the Emperor. Though the fate of the Leviathan remains unknown, the Blood Angels found a chilling clue on Baal Prime, a pile of Xenos skulls arranged in the symbol of their ancient nemesis, the bloodthirster Kabanda and his army of Khornate demons. In the year 1M42, the strategically located Hive world of Vigilus became the center of a war for survival. The Imperium Nihilus relied on Vigilus to connect them with the Imperium Sanctus through the Nachmund Gauntlet, the only known stable pass through the Great Rift. Multiple Xenos and Chaos forces, including the infamous Black Legion led by Abaddon the Despoiler, launched a brutal assault on the planet. The conflict became known as the War of Beasts. Despite the Despoiler's defeat by the valiant warriors of multiple Space Marine chapters under the command of the legendary Ultramarines Chapter Master Marnius Calgar, Vigilus remained a world under siege from Orc, Drukhari, and Genestealer cult factions. The Talledus War, fought in the Era Indomitus, was a war of faith between Chaos and the Imperium of Man to defend the shrine world of Benediction in the Talledus system. Led by the Dark Apostle Corpheron of the Word-Bearers, Chaos forces sought to convert humanity to the worship of the Chaos gods. The fall of Benediction to Chaos was a major milestone in the Word-Bearers' plan to claim mankind for the Dark Gods. The war was fought on three fronts: Benediction, Jiredask, and the Tears of the Emperor. On Benediction, the Word-Bearers nearly seized control of the Grand Honorificum, but the Loyalists were saved by a supernatural force, the Saints' Wall, which allowed the Salamanders Astartes to establish a new defensive perimeter. On Jiredask, the intervention of a Black Templar strike force destroyed the Soul Harvester, but at the cost of the Astartes' commander's life. In the Void, the Night Lords sought to draw in Imperial shipping, but were countered by the White Scar's Vanguard Marines in a vicious guerrilla war. Though the Imperium has so far managed to hold off the Chaos assault on the Talledus system, the conflict continues. The Plague Wars of 12 and 42 were a devastating attempt by the Chaos god Nurgle to conquer the realm of Ultramar. Led by the demon Primarch Mortarion and his Death Guard Traitor Legion, the forces of Nurgle unleashed armies of Nurglite demons, renegades, and Chaos cultists to attack Ultramar on 100 fronts. The defenders fought bravely, but were quickly overwhelmed by the unnatural pestilence that the attackers brought with them. Imperial reinforcements arrived in the form of Ultramarine Primaris Space Marines, but even they could only slow the attackers' progress. By 12M42, the Imperial defenders were depleted, and a plague fleet was systematically destroying Ultramar's defense fleet and star fortresses. Just when all hope seemed lost, the resurrected Primarch Robout Guilliman returned from the first phase of the Indomitus Crusade to stabilize the Imperium Sanctus. His defensive maneuvers bought time to launch a counterattack known as the Spear of Espandor. The combined plague armies were eventually fought to a standstill amongst the ruins of the world of Iax before the Death Guard demon Primarch Mortarion escaped with his forces back to the Scourge Stars. In the aftermath of the war, Guilliman ordered the rebuilding and decontamination of Ultramar and the creation of new procedures for creating further Primaris Ultramarines. The Ultramarines vowed vengeance against the servants of the Dark Gods and began their preparations, but the demands of the Indomitus Crusade called Guilliman away from Ultramar and back out into the Dark Galaxy. The Plague Wars were a tragic chapter in the ongoing battle between the forces of Chaos and the Imperium of Man, but the Ultramarines remained resolute in their determination to protect their realm and strike back against their enemies. And that concludes our second episode of the Warhammer 40K lore series, where we delved into the vast and intricate timeline of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. From the earliest days of human civilization to the catastrophic events of the present, the history of this universe is a long and bloody one, filled with heroes and villains, triumphs and tragedies. But the Imperium of Man, the most powerful human empire in the galaxy, remains at the center of this universe, a beacon of hope in a dark and dangerous universe. In the next episode, we will explore the history and culture of the Imperium, as well as the various factions and individuals who seek to shape its destiny. Join me as we delve deeper into the rich lore of the Warhammer 40,000 universe in Episode 3, The Imperium of Man. Don't forget to watch one of these cool videos and enjoy gaming.